Hi and welcome to the first Flip Learning session. This session will focus on research methods in social psychology, and in particular we'll be looking at questionnaires and interviews. In this video we're going to look at self-report data in psychological research. We will look at designing and conducting a questionnaire and an interview, and we will also be looking at how to write aims and alternative hypothesis. Feel free at any point to pause the video or rewind it, and if you could use the video to complete the activities in your workbook, that would be great. Self-report data is really useful in psychological research because it can give us lots of information about the way people think and feel, about their attitude and behaviour, and it can give us other information such as personality types and other traits they may possess. We can get a large amount of information from these particular things, and we can gather that through questionnaires and interviews. Information from questionnaires are one type of self-report data. Questionnaires are designed to gather a large amount of data from a large sample of people. Questionnaires are very versatile because they can be administered by post, by email, face-to-face or online. A questionnaire is good because you can find out any aspect of a person's life, for instance, what perfume they like, to how they're going to vote in the next election, to what are their views on euthanasia. A questionnaire is a really effective way of collecting data because it allows us to get different types of data. We could get quantitative data, which is numerical data or values, or qualitative data, which is descriptive data and which is more detailed. And we can do this by asking different questions. If you ask a closed question, for instance, which may be a yes/no answer or a list of options where a respondent has to tick or circle, this tends to give you more numerical data, which is easier to analyse but is limited and not as rich. We could use an attitude scale such as a Likert scale, which is where a person or respondent rates their opinion on a particular statement. For instance, teachers should always be obeyed, and they may give a strongly agree to a strongly disagree on how they think about that statement. Finally, we've got open questioning where there's no fixed answers. The respondent is allowed to elaborate and also justify their opinions. There are some issues when conducting research using a questionnaire. People can lie on questionnaires and they may not tell the exact truth, and this may be because of social desirability. They want to make themselves look good and show themselves in the best possible light. Questions should be carefully constructed. We should tend to avoid technical, misleading, ambiguous or complex questions. In a Likert scale, usually there's an odd number of options, but consider the number of options carefully, because if you give an odd number, you have a middle ground, and then most people will actually tend to go for that middle ground or neutral option, and your questionnaire won't really measure much. Also, there's response bias, and this occurs when all the questions are worded favourably and unfavourably, and what happens is the respondent will look at a pattern in the answers and will just end up going with that pattern. So it's important to ensure that you reverse the statements and mix them up a little bit. Issues of reliability and validity are very important in questionnaires. With reliability, we're looking for our questionnaire to be both externally and internally reliable. For external reliability, we're looking for the person to give the same response every time they take the questionnaire. So we use a test-retest method to do this, and this will use the same group of people and get them to sit the questionnaire over and over again and to find out whether they give the same response. In terms of internal reliability, we're looking at whether all the items on the questionnaire measure the same concept equally. It would be not a great questionnaire if they didn't, and they were measuring a different concept. So what we do is we use the split half method, where we split the questionnaires questions in half, and then we score them, and then basically if they're equal we know roughly that they're measuring the same concept. In terms of validity, validity looks at whether it measures what it intends to measure. So face validity is basically whether each question makes sense in terms of what is being measured. Predictive validity is whether the questionnaire can predict future behaviour. For instance, if somebody sits an intelligence questionnaire and comes out with a good mark, then what is the likelihood that they will get academic success from, say, GCSEs or A-levels? Also, we've got concurrent validity, and this is a comparison between other tests measuring the same construct. Another type of self-report data comes from the interview, and there are 3 types of interviews. These are structured, semi-structured and unstructured. And you can see these all in the table. Structured interviews tend to have standardised questions and a standardised format. All respondents are asked the same questions, and mostly these questions consist of closed questions. The strength of this is that it's quick, the questions are easy to administer, you don't need to build up a rapport between yourself and the respondent. The weaknesses are that the data is superficial and may lack depth, and the respondent may feel that they can't truly express their own opinions within the interview. Semi-structured interview tends to be a bit more conversational and a bit more dynamic. There is a set of questions, but there's no standard format to it, so things can flow a little bit more. And you get both types of data, so you get quantitative data and qualitative data from the actual interview. Finally, we've got unstructured interviews. These have got a very loose research aim, and what happens is the interview gathers qualitative information. For this you need to have a good rapport between the interviewer and the respondent, and the interviewer needs to be responsive and a good listener, otherwise the interview will fall flat on its face. The strengths are that it provides richer information about beliefs and attitudes, but there are issues in terms of ethics because we're investigating in more depth, and so we need to write things down, and therefore things need to be kept confidential, such as names, etc. And also we need to be mindful of a person's right to privacy, because we may be asking sort of probing personal questions and we may not be able to overstep the mark. The last thing I would like to discuss in this session is aims and hypothesis, and these are going to be very, very important to your psychological research over the next 2 years. A research aim is basically what you're trying to set out to achieve, a broad statement, if you like, of the desired outcomes. So for instance, we're investigating whether males or females report higher levels of obedience on a questionnaire. A hypothesis, and this could either be an alternative hypothesis or an experimental, depending on whether you're using an experimental method or not, is basically a prediction of what will be found. And this prediction can either be two-tailed or one-tailed, and effectively what that means is a two-tailed hypothesis predicts a difference but doesn't say the direction of that difference. So for instance, there will be a difference in reported levels of obedience between males and females. Or the one-tailed hypothesis, which suggests both a difference and a direction in the difference. For instance, females will report higher levels of obedience than males. The one-tailed and two-tailed hypothesis will be important when we do statistical tests in the coming lessons. In this session we've learned about self-report data in psychological research. We've also looked at designing and conducting a questionnaire in an interview, and we've looked at aims and alternative hypothesis. Now it's up to you to do the activities in your workbook. Remember, you can look at this again and rewind it and pause it and whatever you need to do to help you fill in the questions. Thank you, and I will see you again in the next video. Bye for now.